It's good to have you in class. We will begin our study tonight by going to 1 Samuel chapter 25. We have studied, we skipped over some, studied some. As we've said, we're going to have to maybe hit the mountaintops on some of it. But we're at the point where we've seen the great work of Samuel. We've seen how his mother prayed for him, and God gave her a son. And from that time on, Samuel has been he began his work in the tabernacle under Eli, and then later he became, when Eli died, he became the prophet and of God and so forth. And he was one of the great men of the Old Testament. But look at chapter 25, verse 1. Then Samuel died, and the Israelites gathered together and lamented for him, and buried him at his home in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now that's about all that the Bible has to say about the death of Samuel. A great man, but that tells us that you don't have to give great eulogies of a man. A man lives his life, and his life, sort of, as we say, preaches his sermon. I have preached a lot of, or conducted a lot of funerals. I've come to the point that when I do that, I don't say much about the fella, because, or the lady, or whatever. As far as their life, their experiences, or the way they live, preach their own funerals. But it just strikes me as strange and almost a little sad that this is about what we have about the death of Samuel. But then after that, we go into another account where David gets another wife, and it's a rather interesting account. It says there was a man in the name of in Maon, whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing sheep in Carmel, and the man's name was Nabal. Now the word Nabal means food, by the way. Right. And his wife was Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding and beautiful, but the man was harsh and evil in his doings. He was of the house of Caleb. Now that sort of interests me, that we know Caleb as one of the two that came out of the land of Egypt that went into Canaan. But anyway, the story goes on down that Nabal had some shepherds out, and David and his young men were there in that area, and David sent his young men to ask Nabal for some supplies, if he could give them some supplies. And then in verse 10, in verse 9, so when David's young men came and spoke to Nabal concerning all these words in the name of David and waited, then Nabal answered David's servants and said, and here you can see a lot of his character in these next two verses. Who is David, and who is this son of Jesse, or who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away each one from his master. Shall I then take, and I have just sort of marked each one of these pronouns, shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who I do not know where they are from? And so David's young men turned back and went back and told David what they said. And but this reminds me so much of Luke chapter 12, when Jesus gives the parable of the rich farmer. His field brought forth bountifully, and but he yeah, I think I used this illustration in another lesson, but there are 13 in that parable in the King James Version. There are 13 possessive pronouns. That I, mine. So anyway, the young men told Abigail's wife saying, or Abigail, Nabal's wife saying, David sent messengers, and this is what our master said. And they agreed that David and his men had not in any way harmed them, but rather had protected them. But in verse 17, it tells us something of the man himself, and then in a little later on, Abigail says the same thing. But anyway, 17 of the servants said, now therefore know and consider what you will do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his household, that is, against Nabal, for he is such a scoundrel that one cannot speak to him. So Abigail then, she hurried up and gathered up some supplies and took him, started on her way to meet David, because David was coming with his armed men. And but she didn't tell Nabal where she was going. And in verse 25, she is with David, and she says, "Oh, on me, on me, my Lord, on me, let this iniquity be, and please let your maidservant speak into your ears the words of your, and hear the word of your maidservant. Please let not my Lord regard this scoundrel Nabal, for he is as his name is, Nabal, and his name is folly, and his folly is with him. But I and your young men did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent." So here twice Nabal is called a scoundrel by his wife and by his servants. So Abigail went home. David did not attack. And she went home, and in verse 36, and I'm skipping over some of this because, again, we need to move on. But so it was verse 37, rather. So in the morning when the wine had gone from Nabal and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. There probably is a medical term for that, but it sounds to me either like a heart attack or a stroke that he had. And then 10 days later, he died. And so after he died, David sent in verse 39, David sent his servants to Abigail to propose to her to take her as his wife, and she agreed in verse 42. So Abigail arose and in haste and rode on her donkey, attended by her five of her maidens, and she followed the messengers to David and became his wife. And then it tells us that David took Ahinoam, however that's pronounced, and so he had two wives. And then there's just an afterthought in verse 44. But Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was from Gallim. Now, we find another one of those sad sort of situations. There were a group of people in verse 20, or in chapter 26. They were called Ziphites. They came to Saul, and they were trying to play up to him, I guess. But anyway, they came to tell him where David was. And then David arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, and having 3,000 men of Israel with him to seek David in the wilderness, or Saul did. And then we find that Saul encamped, and again, Saul seemed to be rather careless in his camps. You know, when he came to the cave of Adullam, or there in Gedi, he went inside the cave to do his business, it is said, and David was able to cut off a piece of his robe, and now he encamped out of a hill, and uh, David sees them, and he asked who wants to go with him, and Abishai said that he would, and so they went. Then verse 7 of chapter 26. I'll try to keep you up to where I am. So David said, David and Abishai came to the people, that is, to Saul's army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the camp with his spear stuck in the ground by his head, and Abner, who is his general, by the way, his commander-in-chief, and the people lay all around him. Then Abishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Now therefore, please let me strike him at once with the spear, right to the earth, and I will not have to strike him a second time. In other words, let me pin him to the earth with his own spear. But David said, and you have to keep appreciating David. David wasn't all that perfect at times, and we're going to read some more about him where he gets less perfect. But David did not believe in harming the anointed of the Lord.
Yeah.
And so David said to Abishai, verse 9, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?
That's in denomination. That's something that they hold to. Like they put the preacher up on a pedestal, and they refer to him, touch not God's anointed. Like you say anything against the pastor, you say something against God's anointed.
And that's right. And here, but David, even though Saul is trying to kill him, David knows that Saul has been anointed by Samuel to be God's king, the king that God chose. And even as wicked as Saul has become, David says, I won't touch him. Let the Lord do it. If the Lord wants him dead, let the Lord do it. But David did in verse 12. So David took the spear and the jug of water by Saul's head, and they got away. He and Abishai got away, and no man saw or knew or worked, for they were all asleep, and a deep sleep because or a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. So the Lord helped them here. And then David goes over to the top of the hill on the other side, much like the armies were when David challenged Goliath. But David called out to the people, and he chastised Abner for not guarding his master. And he says in verse 15, are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not guarded your Lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the Lord your king. And then Saul hears all of this conversation in verse 17, and Saul knew David's voice. And is that you? Or is that your voice, my son? David said, it's my voice, my Lord, O king. And then he said, why does my Lord thus pursue his servant? For what have I done? What evil is in my hand? And then he tells the king that I could have killed you. And then in verse 21, then Saul said, I have sinned. Return my son David, for I will harm you no more, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Indeed, I have played the fool and erred exceedingly. And then David answered and said, here is your spear. Let one of your young men come over and get it. And then this was a time, again, that actually I think it was the last confrontation that Saul and David had. And then we come to chapter 27. chapter 27 is, to me, a sad situation. Here is the man who has been anointed by God's prophet Samuel, and we're talking about David. He's been anointed as king of Israel. Okay, king. He first is king of Judah, then later on he gets to be king of all Israel. But anyway, he is. God has chosen him to be the leader of the children of Israel, the king of the nation of Israel. And what does he do? And I think we can probably make all kinds of excuses for him, but I don't know if it is a good excuse that we can make for him. But David decides that he will go down. I guess he's tired of being chased by Saul, so he goes down over to the Philistines, and he goes to Achish the king, and it says, verse 3 says, David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, each man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam and Jezreelites, and Abigail, Nabal's widow. And it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. And then David said, to Achish, if I have found favor in your eyes, then let them give me a place in some town in the country that I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? And Achish gave him Ziklag, and therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. And it says, now the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was a full year and 4 months. In other words, 16 months. Here, in this time, we don't hear anything good that David did. In fact, we don't have much of any knowledge at all of what he did. There's a few things as he's about to come out of that, but it's almost treason.
The Philistines were their enemies, right? The Philistines were their enemies.
Yeah. And he goes over now. He goes out and raids with his people. He goes on raids, I guess, in the name of the Philistines, but he doesn't raid in any of the Jewish people or the Israelites. He raids with the he gives them here. David and his men went up and raided with the Girgashites and Geshurites and the Gersites and the Amalekites, and for those nations were the inhabitants of the land from of old, as you go to Shur as far as the land of Egypt. And David
so he
would do this, and he would take the spoil, but he didn't tell Achish exactly what he was doing. But he wasn't doing anything to the Philistines. He wasn't fighting with the Philistines here. And Achish, look at verse 10. When he would go out and attack, in verse 9, then Achish would say, where have you made a raid today? And David would say, against the area, southern area of Judah, or against the southern area of the whatever that is, and against the Kenites, southern area of the Kenites. And it says that when David would do this, verse 11, David would save neither man nor woman alive to bring news to Gath to say, or saying, lest they should inform on us, saying, thus David did, and thus was his behavior all the time he dwelt in the country of the Philistines. So he wasn't we might say he wasn't helping Achish of the Philistines any, but he was making attacks and getting a lot of spoil, and in fact his actions were of such that when and we'll come to chapter 28, Now it happened when in those days the Philistines gathered their armies together, and Achish said to David, "You come." Then his men, the men of his army, said, "You don't go." In chapter 29, the men of Achish's army, the Philistines, said, "We don't want David behind us. We don't want him anywhere near us. Send him back to Ziklag." But before that comes up, we have another sad situation in the 28th chapter, beginning with verse 3. Now, what did the law of Moses say about those people who practice witchcraft?
It was an abomination.
It's an abomination. They would be put to death. Mm-hmm. And sometimes instead of putting them to death, the king would put them out of the country or deport them to some other country. And Saul had done this. Saul had put them out out of Judah. At least that was a command. Now Samuel had died. This is verse 3 of chapter 28. And all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah in his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and spiritists out of the land. And then the Philistines decided that they would make war upon Saul. So Saul, when he saw when they gathered at Shunem in verse 4, about what does Shunem bring to mind? We hadn't got there yet, but Elisha, you recall, or Elijah rather, he raised the little boy of the shooter. We'll get to that in 2 Kings, I think it is. But anyway, the Saul, when he saw this army, he was afraid and he greatly trembled. Verse 5 and verse 6 says, "And when he inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dream or by Urim or by prophets."
What's Urim?
This was those two things, the Urim and Thummim, that was on Aaron's shoulder pads, and that is how they contacted, how the high priest contacted or was able to speak to God. You get that back over in, I think, in the books of Exodus or Leviticus, but it was called the Urim and the Thummim. I believe it's Thummim. But even if that still existed by this time, and it evidently probably did, but Saul had tried to inquire of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or visions or by the prophets or anything. That's a sad situation. When you don't have Saul probably didn't have a dozen friends in the world. His army all left him with about 500 or 400 men or so, and he's trying to get somebody to go to the Lord for him, and the Lord won't hear him. And he had tried earlier, and when he sinned by not killing the King Agag and he disobeyed in that sin. Well, if you recall, Samuel just walked away and he said, "The Lord has turned away from you," and so on. But anyway, Saul said to his servants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servant said to him, "There is a woman who is a medium in Endor." And Saul disguised himself and so on, and he went. And then the woman, verse 9, the woman says, after Saul has asked her to conduct a seance, then he asked, the woman said to him, "You know that Saul has cut off all the mediums and the spiritists from the land, And why do you lay a snare for me? But Saul says that he swore by the Lord, saying, as the Lord lives, and there will be no punishment. And then he sees Samuel, and Samuel asked him in verse 16, why do you ask me, seeing the Lord has departed from you and has become your enemy? And then he said, he himself spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. And then in verse 19, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. That means you'll be dead. Now in verse 29, the army of the Philistines is ready to attack Saul and his army. And this is where the leaders tell Achish that we don't want David in our midst in this battle. So Achish told David, you haven't done anything. Your actions with me have been upright, but you can't go to battle with me here. You can't go and engage in the battle with me. And David argued about this, but I think my view from reading this, I think David probably breathed a sigh of relief, because David really did not want to go fight against Israelites. He would fight against the Amalekites and the others, but he didn't want to fight here. So David and his men, verse 11, or the last verse of 29, he and his men rose to depart in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. That's that big valley up there in the Galilee area.
But he didn't even try to stop him from fighting Israel.
No. It just,
I mean, again, you not want to participate, but you didn't even try to stop him, because you were rampaging on the other villages and countries and stuff, whatever, and you left Israel alone. Now they're going to do, but they're keeping you out, but you're not stopping them.
Yeah, that's it is my view of that David knew. He knew what Samuel had said. He knew that Saul was God's enemy now, and he knew that God was going to allow the Philistines to come in and kill him. But in chapter 30, the last chapter in 1 Samuel, David he goes back to Ziklag, and when he gets there, all of his wife and his wives and children and all the other men, their wives, had been captured. The Amalekites had come in and invaded, and they had taken, verse 2, had taken captive the women and those who were from small to great. They did not kill anyone, but carried them away and went their way. And then David and his men came and saw this, and they lamented, they cried aloud until they just couldn't cry anymore, according to verse 4. And it says that David's two wives, Ahinoam and the Jezreelite, or the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite, I'll get it right in a moment, had been taken captive. And then they were greatly distressed, so David takes an army of 600 with him, and he gets Abiathar to go with to ask God, will God give him the victory? And God says, I'll give you the victory. And they go and they pursue with these men, and they came to the brook Besor, where they stayed, and who were left behind. And there were 200 that were so tired that they couldn't cross over in verse 10. And then they found an Egyptian in verse 11, and he brought them to where the Amalekites were, and with the promise that that David would not harm him, and that David made that promise. And they, of course, they came and they invaded and they attacked the Amalekites and they destroyed them. And David took all the flocks and the herds and all the spoil of the land, got all of the people that had been taken away by the Amalekites and brought them back to where the 200 men were waiting. And in verse 21, now David came to the 200 men who had been so weary they could not follow David, whom they also had made to stay at the brook Bethel. So they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with them. And when David came near the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked men, worthless men, of those who went with David, that doesn't mean everybody went with him, but were wicked, but there were some in the group. They said, because these did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except for every man's wife and children, that they may lead them away and depart. In other words, they didn't help in the battle, so they don't get any loot. And David said, not so. But David said, my brethren, you shall not do so, for with what the Lord has given us, who has preserved us and delivered into our hand the troop that came against us, for who will heed you in this matter? But as his part is who goes down to the battle, so shall be his part who stays by the supplies, that they share alike. And that, we are told, it was so from that day forward, and he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel to this day. Now, none of the, as far as I can read and research, there might have been some pockets of it, but when in our wars, in the Revolutionary War, because that was here on our country, but or in our land, but the War of 1812, and that again was in our land. Then you come to the Civil War, and then you come to the Spanish-American War, and then you come to World War I, World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam, and all this. I know the law of the American Army, at least it was stated to us, and it was a criminal offense that if because we were sent to Korea, and we were told that in your fighting here or in your whatever you do in this land, you are not to take any loot. You're not to take any thing from the people as far as loot or whatever. But in other armies, they did. In the Israelite army, they did, and in the Babylonian army and the others, they, Nebuchadnezzar came to Israel and destroyed it, but he took all the good stuff back. But it was a law in Israel that if you go to battle and some stay with the baggage, you get if you're one assigned to the baggage, you get your share of the loot, or the spoil, they call it. You get your share of the spoil, just like those who go to battle.
That's what the Germans did in World War II when they captured Paris.
Yeah,
they took all the paintings and stuff and stored them away.
American Army it was a court-martial offense to even take a wristwatch from one of the prisoners, something like that. It was. Now I won't say it wasn't done, but it was a court-martial offense to do it. And I never did, because I was with the enemy as they had been captured and they were in a prison camp. And but we didn't take anything that they had like that. Now we took the knives away from them, and of course the weapons, but we didn't. Any personal property that they had, we did not take it. But there was time when that wasn't so. And then we come to the end of the death of Saul and his son. I want to read it. It's a short 13-verse chapter. I want to read it all. and make some comment, because we come into the second book of Samuel, and it picks up where chapter 31 leaves off. And we have to remember that in the original text, there were no chapters and verses and so on. But let's read that and make some comment. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's son. The battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers, or the arrows. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised Philistines come and thrust me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. So he committed suicide. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with it. So Saul's 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all his men died together that same day. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley, and those who were on the other side of the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. This is those cities on the other side of the Jordan, which would be on the east side of the Jordan, where the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half tribe of Manasseh had as their land grant. And then, so it happened the next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa, and they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim it in the temple of their idols and among the people. Then they put his armor in the temple of the Ashtaroths, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth Shan. Now when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and traveled all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. So what you have in the topography, or geography, I should say, you have that area where Gideon defeated the Midianites, right in at the hill of Morah, and then you have Mount Gilboa in the same general area, and a little ways away there's a mountain that looks like a top hat, or just a derby hat type thing, and that's Mount Tabor, and but they in that general area is a place called Beth Shan, or Beth Shean. It wasn't at that time evidently much of a place, but later during the Roman times they made a Roman colony or a Roman city out of it, and they built up a beautiful building, built a stadium there. In fact, I stood in that stadium around, and I was up on the stage of that stadium. It would seat about 4,000 or 5,000. Nobody out there. The other people were going in. So I got up there and I acted silly, and I started singing, "Since my baby left me, I found a new place to do it." And some little old girl come around to me, and I turned as red as your shirt. But Beth Shan, the old city, was on a flat top hill. It's a rather strenuous walk up that, especially for an old man. But I walked up it, and it was on this wall. The old city up there has been demolished. There's nothing left up there. There was walls abandoned there, and the Philistines had attached the bodies of Saul and his sons on that wall, and they beheaded Saul. And so these men from Jabesh Gilead came and they got those bodies. Evidently, they did it by stealth because the Philistines were still there, but they got them and they gave them a respectable burial. That is what we have for 1 Samuel. We come to 2 Samuel, and we're going to we're going to have to move rather quickly, but I don't want to move so quickly that we're not getting anything. So if I have decided this, by the way, if it comes to the fact that we have to not cover some material, I'm going to let it be probably 1st and 2nd Chronicles, because 1st and 2nd Chronicles is covered a lot in 1st and 2nd Kings. Just to tell you what I mean, 1st and 2nd Kings is about the tribes or the kingdoms of Israel. First the United Kingdom and then the divided kingdom. And then after Israel went into captivity of Assyria, you have the kingdom of Judah. 1st and 2nd Chronicles is the history of Judah, even going back a long way, because they knew that out of Judah, God had said through the seed of Abraham, through the seed of Isaac, Jacob, and Judah, and David, that the Messiah would come. So that's why you have a lot of this, and so begat so and so, and so begat so and so. But you really let you know what it is. But this 1st and 2nd Chronicles does not deal with the nation of Israel. That is the northern kingdom, other than when it makes reference to something that somebody in the southern kingdom did concerning that. So we will cover most of that history. We may, in 1st and 2nd Kings, especially 2nd Kings, we may turn over and flip-flop a little bit and compare, but I don't want to go so rapidly that it just sounds like a fairy tale. I want to, I want you to get, because this is to me, it's extremely important information. We learn here from things that God has done and said, and we can look at God when we have our relationship with Him through Christ, and we can see that God has not changed His principles. God changed His law 3 times. There was the law of the patriarch, and there each patriarch was given something to do. Adam was not to eat of a fruit, and Noah was to build an ark, and Abraham was to leave his country and later offer his son. These commands are not for us today. And then when the Mosaic law came along, the law of Moses was given only to the children of Israel. And you need to point that out. When somebody goes back there and talks about that we're under this or we can do this, if you are a Gentile, and you and I are Gentiles, that law was never observed by the Gentiles. Now, some Gentiles proselyted into it, and the new temple had a court called the Court of the Gentiles, but they never were first-class citizens or first-class Jews. That may help us in learning these things. But anyway, we're going to go maybe a little rapid, but we're not going to just go over it like a high-speed boat. So we want to get some of the information that's here. The report of Saul's death. Now, Saul is dead. The last chapter above it, Saul is dead. Now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David had returned to the slaughter of the Amalekites, or from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had stayed 2 days in Ziklag. On the third day, behold, it happened that a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. So it was when he came to David that he fell on the ground and prostrated himself. And David said, "Where have you come from?" And he said, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." Then David said to him, how did the matter go? Please tell me. And he answered, the people have fled from the battle. Many of the people have fallen dead, and Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also. So David said to the young man who told him, how do you know that Saul and Jonathan his son are dead? Then the young man is going to tell the truth part of the way, and then he's going to make the big mistake to lie. He said to him, as I happened by chance to be on Mount Gilboa, there was Saul leaning on his spear, and indeed the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me, and he called and said, and I answered, here am I. And he said to me, who are you? So I answered him, I am an Amalekite. And he said to me again, please stand over me and kill me, for the anguish has come upon me, but my life remains in me. So I stood over him and killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was on his head and the bracelets that were on his arm, and brought them here to my Lord. Now, part of that, he probably saw what happened, because he described pretty much what happened. Because he didn't bring in the armor bearer, but he saw that Saul had committed suicide. But now, like some soldiers sometimes, a lot of times that people go to war and they come back, most of them don't really like to talk about it. There are things that go on in war that you don't talk about. Mm-hmm. But they come back with some tall tales. And I know I've been around some, my uncle and the others that I knew were in World War II, and they'd come back, and it was enjoyable to listen to their tall tales, but probably they were stretching it just about 20 yards. And so this young man, he begins to stretch that. And he said, I was there, and Saul was dying, and he asked me to kill him. Well, the armor bearer had already fallen on his sword, and Saul had fallen on his, and we're told that he died. But he said, I stood over him and killed him. Therefore, verse 11, David took hold of his own clothes and tore them, and so did all the other men who were with him. And they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan, his son, for the people of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. Then David said to the young man who told him, where are you from? He said, I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite. So David said to him, how was it you were not afraid to put forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Now, two things are obvious here. The young man knew who Saul was. Mm-hmm. He took the king's crown, and he took the bracelets, and he told David, I said, I saw him and knew who he was. And so David says, how were you not afraid to kill the Lord's anointed? Now, regardless of what we may have thought about any particular president, about our present president, John F. Kennedy, I wasn't a fan of John F. Kennedy. He did a lot of good things. He stood up to Khrushchev, and he in his speech, I think I mentioned this, in his inauguration speech, he had, don't ask what my country can do for me or for you, Ask what you can do for your country. But somebody, I don't know if it was the man that they said it was, but somebody killed him. They assassinated him. The Bible tells us that that God puts in, he sets up rulers and he deposes. Whether I like Obama or do not like Obama is not even in discussion. But if I had him in the sights of a gun, I just would not pull the trigger. If God wants him out of the way, God will take him out of the way, and some other ways. But you know, it's we need to be careful how we talk about our rulers. And I think we can criticize the person who, whether you're Democrat, Republican, or whatever. But we need to appreciate and respect the office. I think we need to do that. And this young man did not do that. So David turned around and he says to one of the young men, he called for one of the young men and said, "Go near and execute him." And he struck him, and so he died.
But I mean, but he didn't kill him though. He didn't kill Saul.
No, but he said he did.
Why would he do that if he's an ally?
I think he wanted to be praised. I've killed I wasn't an Israelite. I'm an Amalekite, and I know he was your enemy. I have gotten rid of your enemy for you. And I think he would have thought that I'm. You surely appreciate that. How about a little present or something,
Yeah, and then also you have to understand, not only was he a king, he was a warrior also. So, this guy coming along, I killed the mighty Saul. Hey, David being a king, okay, now time to give me a reward.
Yeah.
Nobody's around to see what I did. Nobody can say I did. Nobody can say I didn't.
But his own testimony cost him his life.
Mm-hmm.
He thought, I'm sure that he didn't think David would have him executed. I doubt he would have done what he did. But he did this, and he said, David said to him, "Your blood is on your own head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed." The young man may not have had time to say, "Wait a minute, King David, I was just hoping for a present," but because the young man just took him and killed him. But from this comes, David wrote a song. Now, there was a movie still in existence where one of the actors in the movie, he hears a lady reading some poetry, and he is standing behind her. She doesn't see him at first, and then when she sees him, he made the statement, "I always loved poetry, but I never could understand it. I'm that way. I love to read poems, but most of the poems I read, I don't have the slightest idea. I like the beauty, I like the rhythm of it, but I don't know what they're talking about." But this is what David wrote at the death of Saul. "The beauty of Israel is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, nor rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for the shield of the mighty is cast away, the shield of Saul, not anointed with oil. The blood of the slain from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, the sword of Saul did not return empty. Saul and Jonathan were beloved and pleasant in their lives, and in their not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan was slain in your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of a woman. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. Here's a dirge, or it's called in the book of Jasher, and I don't know what the book of Jasher is unless it's just some other historian that wasn't inspired wrote. But it is a song where Saul, or where David exalts, he praises Saul. He knew what Saul had done, but he knew that God had at one time had looked upon Saul as a man that he wanted to be king. And he knew that this Saul, even though he changed in his spirit from being humble to arrogant and disobedient, David knew that he had a son, Jonathan, that they were very close friends. And again, I think I've mentioned in another place, but where David says, your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of a woman, there are those who take that and say that proves that David and Jonathan were homosexuals. It doesn't prove any such. We have, I have had friends, and I still have friends that are, and they were not closer to me than my wife, but they're closer to me than some other, even why, or the women that I know and I'm good friends with them, that there are some men that have helped me along the way, and they've mentored me. They have directed me in ways that are right to go. And you can't help but be a friend of that person and love that person. And you, even though there's a woman who's a righteous woman, a godly woman, I love her, but not in the sense of the closeness that it was with David and Jonathan. And so it's I don't know if I can explain it any better than that, but it certainly does not give. God would not allow this kind of words to be inspired and then tell people that such was an abomination to him. Then in chapter,
some also we go in Deuteronomy, it says, man shall not lie with mankind as he does with woman. So you come up here, that would be a contradiction of
it would be. It would be.
Leviticus.
Well, you read Romans chapter 1, and you read 1 Corinthians chapter 6, you read Galatians chapter 5, and here you have a listing, and actually 2 Timothy chapter 3, you have a listing of the sins of people and the degradation. And in most of those, homosexuality, or the New King James calls it homosexuality, the other just calls it perverseness. But it's there, and it's always condemned.
That word in 1 Corinthians 6:9, the effeminate,
Yes.
That's defined as a catamite. And a catamite, what they would do is a man have a sexual relationship with boys, and that's how that's defined.
Well, in the Old Testament, God gave laws and principles, and he's one of the 10 commandments where you shall not commit adultery. Yeah, there's also you're not a man is not to lie or have sexual relationship with an animal, things like that. And even though that law was to them, the moral law, God's moral law, has always been the same. People were to be righteous. But we come to chapter 2. Now, in this we find that David is anointed king, but he's not anointed king over all of Israel. He's anointed king over Judah because one of the sons of Saul was taken by Abner, who was Saul's commanding general, and made king of Israel. But let's read it. It happened on the day that David inquired of the Lord, said, "Shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah?" And the Lord said, "Go up." And he asked which one, and the Lord told him to Hebron. Now Hebron, you remember back in Joshua set up 6 cities of refuge. Hebron was one of those. So that is going to come into play in this chapter. So and they go to Hebron, and then the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, "The men of Jabesh Gilead were the ones who buried Saul." Now we just read that, how they came and they buried him, took his body down off the walls of Bethshean. So David sent messengers to the king, or to the people of Jabesh Gilead, and said to them, "You are blessed of the Lord, for you have shown this kindness to your lord to Saul, and have buried him." David appreciated that. David knew that Saul was an enemy, and David could have killed him, but he didn't. And he killed the one who said, "I killed him." But David appreciated that people recognized that Saul was appointed of God. And now David, after he sent messages, he said, "And now may the Lord show kindness and truth to you also. I also will repay you for your kindness, because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strengthened, and be valiant, and your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them." Now here I think is a little bit of politics. Now remember, the people of Jabesh Gilead, they're over in the area of east of the Jordan, which would be the land grant of Gad and Manasseh, half-tribe Manasseh, and Reuben. These all later constituted, they were included in the kingdom of Israel. They went with that rather than with Judah. But David is simply saying, "I appreciate what you did. And by the way, people have asked me to be king over them, and they've anointed me to be king over them." And he just left it there. He didn't say, "Will you come over?" or anything like that. But then we're told about the southern or the northern kingdom now, or it's not yet divided. But we're told about the others. Ishbosheth is the son of Saul. But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and he made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, and over all Israel. Now, all Israel here would exclude the tribe of Judah, because David has already been anointed king over that. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel. He reigned 2 years. Only the house of Judah followed David. At the time that David was king of Hebron over the house of Judah, and the time that David was king over Hebron, or in Hebron over the house of Judah, was 7 years and 6 months. David reigned, well, we usually talk about the 3 kings in the United Kingdom. There was Saul, he reigned for 40 years. David reigned for 40 years, and Solomon reigned for 40 years. Well, that makes a good equation. it may be that that they rounded off. I'll put it that way. But David he was king in Hebron over the house of Judah for 7.5 years. And then Israel and Judah go to war. And here is one of the silliest things to me that in this series that we're doing, here is Abner and Joab. Abner the son of Ner, and he took this one. And Joab the son of Zeruiah, the servant of David, went out and met them by the pool of Gibeon. So they sat down, one on one side of the pool and one on the other side of the pool. So there's a pool there in that area, and it's called the pool of Gibeon. And here they are, sitting one army on one side and one on the other. They're not fighting; they're just getting ready to do battle. And Joab, Abner, verse 14. Abner said to Joab, "Let the young men now arise and compete before us." And Joab said, "Let them arise." Now that sounds innocent. Let's go out and take wooden swords and go through a fake thing. Nah, the ones that go out there are going to get killed. Mm-hmm. What commander of his army is to will use his soldiers to make sport? Let them arise. One translation said, "Let them make sport." But so they arose and went over by the number 12 from Benjamin, followers of Ishbosheth and son of Saul, and 12 from the servants of David. And each one grasped his opponent by the head and thrust his sword in his opponent's side, so they fell down together. Therefore, this place was called the Field of Sharp Swords, which is in Gibeon. What was the purpose of that? I can't. When I read that, I don't have a military mind. I realize that, but why? Now with David and Goliath, there was people, but these people, they're kinfolks. Mm-hmm. But these leaders, Abner being the leader, now Abner is going to later come over to David, and then Joab's going to kill Abner.
So this little fight was put in the same camp. Mm-hmm. So they didn't pick 12 guys and go on the other side and we against you against us. They did this within the camp. They're killing each other.
Yeah, well, yeah. Now, the soldiers of Judah, or the men of David, which is he's king over Judah, and the men of Israel, who Ishbosheth is king, and Abner is his commanding general. Joab and the two generals, they come and said, let's put on a little competition out here. Let's see who can kill one another. And it's just, to me, that is so hard. I got to tell those that were killed, what they tell their mothers. Killed in battle? No, killed in sport. Mm-hmm. Just to watch. Of course, now I realize that the Romans, when they came and with this in the Colosseum, that they made executions public, and it was a public spectacle, and people were so bloodthirsty they loved to see that. But here's two armies, all from the seed of Abraham, all from the seed of Isaac and Jacob, and they do this. Well, that I can't answer the question of why they did it, but after that, there arose a great battle, and Abner and his men were beaten. This is verse 17. And then the three sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now this Asahel is going to play a part, and he is going to play a part with Abner. So let's read on. So Asahel, well, let's see. Asahel was as fleet as foot as a wild gazelle. You know what a gazelle is? One of those African deer you see, or animals jumping like that, I guess. But a gazelle is fast. So this young man, that's probably an exaggeration, but he was well known as a fast runner. So he pursued Abner. Now, Abner and his men have lost the battle, and this young man decides he's going to take on Abner, and he pursued him, and he did not turn to the right from Abner. Then Abner looked behind him and said, "Are you Asahel?" And Asahel, and he answered, "I am." And Abner said to him, "Turn aside, turn to your right hand or to your left, and lay hold on one of the young men and take his armor for yourself." But Asahel would not turn around or aside from following him. So Abner begs him, or tells him, in essence, "I don't want to kill you. Quit following me. I don't want to kill you." And so Abner said again to Asahel, "Turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I face your brother Joab?" He doesn't want to kill him, but he knows he can. However, he, that is Asahel, refused to turn, and therefore Abner struck him in the stomach with the blunt end of the spear, so that the spear came out of his back, and he fell down and died on the spot. Abner must have been a pretty strong person. He's got evidently his spear in his hand, and he would not hold it up this, he'd be running this way with it. And Asahel comes up behind him, and the handle, I could call it the handle, the blunt end, Abner just jabs it back, and it hits Asahel in the stomach and goes all the way through and kills him. Now, keep in mind, this Asahel is the brother of Joab. Now, under the law of Moses, if I kill one of your kinfolks, you have the right to kill one of mine. If I knock out your eye for an eye, and tooth for a tooth. That's why the city of refuge was there. If you kill someone unawares, well, they deal with this, but in verse 24, Joab and Abishai also pursued Abner, and as the sun was going down, when they came to the hill of Alma, and it was before God by Giah, by the wilderness of Gibeon. Now the children of Benjamin gathered together behind Abner, became a unit, and took their stand on top of the hill. And Abner called to Joab and said, "Shall the sword devour forever? Did you not know that it will be bitter to the latter end? How long will it be until you tell the people to return from pursuing their brethren?" Now, Joab was pursuing, he was going to take his pound of flesh. And Joab said, "As God's lived, unless you had spoken, surely then by morning all the people would have given up pursuing you." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the people stood still and did not pursue Israel anymore, nor did they fight anymore. Then Abner and his men went all night through the plain and crossed the Jordan, and went through all Bithron, and they came to Mahanaim. And Joab returned from pursuing Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, they were missing of David's servant 19 men and Asahel. But the servants of David had struck down of Benjamin and Abner's men, 360 men who died. Then they took up Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb, which was in Bethel, and Joab and his men went all night, and they came to Hebron at daybreak. Now, in this next chapter, we're going to find about Abner's death and Saul's mourning of it.
Don't Ishbosheth get killed? Did they kill him in one of the raids?
Yeah, yeah, that's in chapter 4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're coming to that. But here it says there was a long war between the house of David and and David grew stronger, and Saul grew. The house of Saul grew weaker. And then we have a little interlude here. It gives us the sons of David. And this is going to become important to us, but not right now. But the sons of David were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was Ammon by Ahinoam, Jezreelites. The second, Chileab by Abigail, the widow of Nabal. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmah, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. And the fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Bitol. And the sixth, Astrim, or Ithram, I guess would be, by David's wife, Eglah, and these were born to David in Hebron. Now, how many do we have here? We have 6. Is this all of the sons that David's going to have? No, we're going to find he's going to have a whole bunch more. But David did not follow the law that said that the king was not to accumulate concubines or wives and concubines. Solomon didn't follow that either. But anyway, Abner joined.
He was sure busy before Bathsheba came along.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. But Abner then sends word to David and comes to David and says, in essence, I'm willing to join you. I can bring people over, and you can be king over all of them. And let's just read verses, starting at verse 6. Now it was so, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner was strengthening his hold on the house of Saul. And Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. So Ishbosheth said to Abner, why have you gone into my father's concubine? So Abner went into Saul's concubine, and Abner became very angry at the words of Ishbosheth, and said, am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Today I show loyal to the house of Saul your father, to his brothers and his friends, and have not delivered you to the hand of David. And you charge me today with a fault concerning this woman? May God do so to Abner, and more also, if I do not do for David as the Lord has sworn to him, to transfer the kingdom of the house of Saul and set it up, the king of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to Beersheba. But he could not answer. That is, Ishbosheth could not answer David or Abner on that. He was afraid. And then Abner sends messengers to David, and he more or less said, let's make a covenant. You make a covenant with me indeed, and my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel to you. Abner now is ready to put Ishbosheth aside, that he's shown himself not to be a good king. So Abner says, I'm going to join forces with David. And David said in verse 13, good, I will make a covenant with you. One thing I require of you, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face. Now we learned that Saul had given, first Saul had promised David, or the one who killed Goliath, that he would give him his first daughter in marriage. And her name was Merva something.
Yeah.
And then when it came time for David to take her, Saul had already given her to somebody else. So the Bible tells us, or the scripture tells us, that Michal loved David.
The name of the wife, Merva something?
And go back and find out.
Michael?
But anyway,
That's what Saul gave.
It was Saul's first daughter, his oldest daughter. But David had been given to Michal, but then when he went to claim her, Saul had given her this Palti. And David said, I will make a covenant with you if you'll bring Michal, my wife. So David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, give me my wife Michal, whom I have betrothed to myself for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband from Paltiel, the son of Laish. Then her husband went along with her to Bahurim, weeping behind her. So Abner said to him, go, return, and he returned. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of...
He took the man's wife.
Yeah, well, first of all, she had been married. She had been married to David, and now Saul takes her and gives her to Paltiel, and then and so on. So this man, he just, you feel for him, but when the king says, I want her, and that was, when Samuel said that he will take your wives and so forth, that this king will, we see that happening.
Mm-hmm.
So Abner then commanded the elders, saying, in times past you were seeking for David to be king over you, now then do it. And so on. And then 19, Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin. Then Abner also would speak at the hearing of David in Hebron, and that all seemed good in Israel and the whole house of Benjamin. So Abner and 20 men with him came to David in Hebron, and David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. Then Abner said to David, I will arise and go and gather all Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner, and he went in peace. And then Joab comes in. Now Joab is David's commander-in-chief, or commanding general, and he comes in, and David tells him that Abner, the son of Ner, and he sent him away, and he's gone in peace. Some of Joab's troops told him that. Then Joab, verse 24, came to the king and said, what have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why is it that you sent him away? He's already gone. Surely you realize that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you, to know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know all that you're doing. And when Joab had gone from David's presence, he sent his messengers after Abner and brought him back from the well of Sir, but David did not know it. Now notice, now when Abner had returned to Hebron, he's now in the city of refuge, Joab took him aside in the gate, to go outside the gate. And remember, what was the law about the city of refuge?
Well, he couldn't do no harm to anybody inside the city. That's why it's a
Right,
refuge.
that if he's inside the city, if he is not guilty, if he just killed unawares, if he's a murderer, they're going to give him a trial and then they'll execute him. But here, Joab is not waiting. He said, "Let me speak to you privately." And there, when he went out, he stabbed him in the stomach so that he died for the blood of Ashel, his brother. And after when David heard it, he said, "My kingdom and I are guiltless before the Lord forever. The blood of Abner, the son of the blood of Abner, let the rest of the head of Joab, or let it rest. I'm reading too fast. And let it rest on the head of Joab and all his father's house, and let there never fail to be in the house of Joab one who has a discharge, or who is a leper, who leans on a staff, or falls by the sword, or who lacks bread." So Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had killed their brother Ashel in Gibeon in the battle. Now David places a curse on Joab, but now we're going to notice as we continue on. Let's see, we've got about 15 minutes. We're going to notice that Joab, we're going to see David's administration, and Joab is in it, and as well as some others. But God more or less gave David the responsibility to put Joab to death and to put some others to death. But David didn't do it. But in 1 Kings, when David is old, he's too old, and Solomon is going to take his place. He charges Solomon, "You don't forget." And there's a couple of others that he had to say about that. That David was supposed to do it, but he put it on his son Solomon. His son Solomon didn't have any qualms about it at all. He had him put to death. And then David mourning for it, and then there's our verses 33. It is a lament of David for Abner. "Should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands are not bound, were not bound, nor your feet put in fetters. A man falls before wicked men, so you fell." In other words, you came out. You made a fool of yourself, Abner. You were in a place of safety. You were inside the city, inside the walls, and you came out. You let Joab talk you into coming out. And Joab killed you. Your hands were not bound. Your feet were not put in fetters, but you were killed. Then all the people wept and over him again. And then in verse 7, "For all the people and all Israel understood that day that it had not been the king's intent to kill Abner or the son of Ner. Then the king said to his servant, Do you not know that a prince and a great man is fallen in Israel today?" A lot of times you'll hear preachers preaching some older preacher's funeral. They'll use this passage. I preached the funeral of George Darling, who was a great gospel preacher, and I preached the funeral of Max Miller, who was to me he was my Jonathan. And I use this. "Do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel?" Neither of them fell by battle, but they just died. And he says, "I'm weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too harsh for me. The Lord shall repay an evildoer the evildoer according to his wickedness. So David says the Lord's going to repay this, but David's going to put that repayment for Solomon to do. Then we come to the fact of Ishbosheth. When Saul's, here we've got about 6 minutes. When Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. Now, Saul's son had 2 men who were captains of troops, and one of them was Benaiah, and the other was Rechab, the sons of Rimmon and Beeroth, and the children of Benjamin, for Beeroth was a part of Benjamin, because the Beeroths fled to get them and have been sojourners into this day. So there's some of the history. Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened as she had made haste that he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. I'd hate to have son that name every day on a check or something. Mephibosheth. But then, anyway, these 2 sons of Rimmon and Rechab, they set out and came at the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying in his bed. They came there as though they would get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach, and the 2 of them escaped. And when they came into the house, he was lying on his bed. This is going back and reiterating what they've done. And they struck him and killed him, beheaded him, and took his head, and were all night escaping the plains. And they brought the head to Ishbosheth to David at Hebron. And here they said, "Here is the head of your enemy, who sought your life, and the Lord has avenged my Lord and the king this day, and of Saul his descendants." But David answered these 2 men and the sons of these 2 men, and said, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversary, when someone told me, saying, 'Look, Saul is dead,' thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag, and the one who thought I would give him a reward for his views or his news. How much more when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house on his bed? Therefore shall I not require his blood at your hands and remove you from the earth?" So David commanded his young men, and they executed them and cut off their hands and feet and hanged them by the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner in Hebron. Now, from what I read on this cutting off of the hands and the feet, this was done as an enemy of the king. That way, this person could never take any, even if he lived, he could never take any drastic action against this person, because he didn't have any feet and he didn't have any hands. Let's go. Yeah. The next one just tells of David's reign, and chapter 5, and it tells that they came in and they made David king over all Israel. He was 30 years old, and he began to reign here. He reigned for 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. In Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years in all Israel, Judah. And then he made the conquest of Jerusalem. The Jebusites were never driven out by Joshua, and David drove them out and made this his capital, as a matter of fact. And then it tells us some of the other work that he did. In verse 10 of chapter 5 says, "So David went on and became great, and the Lord of hosts was with him. And this Hiram, king of Tyre, which is up on the seacoast north of Israel, sent messengers to David and cedars and trees and so forth, and he built David a house. And of course, it was a mansion, the way it's described. And then David, after he was this, he exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people. Verse 13 and says that David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he had come to Hebron. Also, more sons and daughters were born to him. We only have the name of one daughter, unless some of these are daughters. But they were born to him in Jerusalem: Shemaiah, Shobab, and Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhiah, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet. Y'all want to give those a try and see if you can pronounce them? And then we're also told that the Philistines come again and they are defeated. And in fact, verse 25 says, and David defeated them as the Lord had commanded him, and he drove them back from Geba as far as Gezer. That's down near Egypt. And then the next chapter, David brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, and we're going to find that he didn't have a very successful try the first time. But we'll pick up here in chapter 6 next week. Mark that.
David was something else.
Yeah, David was a great man, but he was also, it seemed to me, impetuous in some ways. Well, I don't guess there's a pole.
Sure, he liked the women, that's for sure.
Yes, he did. I've sat there so long, I can't stand up. Let's see. Stop broadcast. Okay, fellas, you're gonna